What happens when the woman you married as a joke, the one you cruelly called your fat shield to your friends, suddenly becomes the only reason you are still breathing? Vincent Romano thought he held all the cards, laughing at his devoted plus-sized wife while parading his glamorous mistress around town. But he didn't realize Penelope was guarding a secret that would shatter his entire criminal empire. When the blood dried and she vanished without a trace, the laughing stopped, and the real nightmare began. The stained glass windows of the Cathedral of the Holy Name cast long fractured shadows across the cold marble floor. It was meant to be the most beautiful day of Penelope Sullivan's life, but as she stood in the opulent bridal suite, the heavy silk of her custom gown felt more like a straitjacket than a wedding dress. Penelope was not the typical mafia bride. In a world of razor-thin supermodels, former beauty queens, and women sculpted by expensive plastic surgeons, Penelope was undeniably visibly different. She was a plus-sized woman, carrying the soft, heavy curves that the brutal, superficial society of the Chicago underworld openly mocked. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, an Irish-American bookie with a gambling addiction that vastly outweighed his sense of self-preservation, had accumulated a staggering $10 million debt to the Romano crime syndicate. When Thomas defaulted, the ruthless head of the family, Vincent Romano, came to collect. But Vincent didn't just want money. He needed a legitimate, quiet, and unconditionally loyal wife to appease the traditionalist dons on the commission, who refused to name an unmarried man as the supreme head of the Chicago outfit. Penelope, desperate to save her father from a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens, offered herself. Vincent accepted the deal with a cold, calculating smirk. As the organ music swelled, Penelope took a deep breath, her hands trembling around a bouquet of white orchids. She genuinely loved Vincent. She had loved him from afar for years, ever since she was a teenager, and he was just a rising soldier in his father's crew. She foolishly believed that her devotion, her kindness, and her unwavering loyalty could melt the ice around the young Don's heart. Walking down the aisle, the whispers were deafening. "Look at the size of her," hissed Sophia Falcone, a prominent underboss's wife, her voice carrying over the music. "Vincent must be doing this as a charity tax write-off," another muttered. Vincent stood at the altar looking like a dark god carved from obsidian. His tailored Armani suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes devoid of any warmth. When Penelope finally reached him, he didn't offer his hand. He merely stared at her, his expression a mask of supreme indifference. The vows were exchanged in a sterile monotone. When the priest instructed them to kiss, Vincent leaned in and barely brushed his lips against her cheek. It felt like a branding of ownership, not an act of love. The reception at the Romano estate was a lavish affair, dripping with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with imported champagne. Penelope sat at the head table feeling entirely invisible, despite taking up more space than the women around her. Vincent had spent exactly 4 minutes by her side before disappearing into his private cigar lounge with his uncle Carmine Romano and his brutally efficient enforcer, Leo Lombardi. Hoping to escape the suffocating glares of the guests, Penelope slipped away, wandering the long, dimly lit corridors of the mansion. As she neared the heavy oak doors of the cigar lounge, she heard the gruff voice of Uncle Carmine. "I don't understand you, Vincent." Carmine growled, the clinking of a whiskey glass echoing into the hallway. "You could have had anyone. Victoria Marino, Isabella Rossi. Women who look like they belong on the arm of a don. Instead, you marry the bookie's blimp. You're making the family look weak." Penelope froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath. Then came Vincent's voice, smooth, cold, and dripping with malicious amusement. "You're looking at it all wrong, Carmine. This isn't about prestige. It's about utility. Utility. Leo Lombardi chuckled darkly. What in case of a famine? The men erupted into cruel laughter. Penelope squeezed her eyes shut, a hot tear slipping down her cheek. Exactly, Vincent replied, his tone chillingly casual. Look at the business we are in. There are targets on our backs every second of the day. The Colombians, the Russians, the feds, they all want a piece of me. A beautiful wife is a liability. She demands attention, she commands the room, she becomes a target. But Penelope... Vincent let out a low, mocking laugh. She's so desperate for a scrap of affection, she'll do whatever I tell her. She stays in the house, she asks no questions, and if a bullet ever comes my way, when we're out, let's just say she's wide enough to catch it. She's just a shield, a pathetic fat meat shield. And the best part, she thinks I'll actually learn to love her. The word struck Penelope like physical blows. Her breath hitched a strangled sob tearing from her throat before she could stop it. The silence in the room beyond the door was instantaneous. "Who's out there?" Leo barked. Penelope didn't wait. She gathered the heavy skirts of her gown and ran her vision, blurred with tears, the echoing laughter of her new husband burning into her soul. She locked herself in the master bathroom, collapsing onto the cold tiles, weeping until her chest ached. In that moment, the naive, hopeful girl died. She realized the horrifying truth of her existence. She was not a wife. She was a human barricade, purchased with her father's debt. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and life at the Romano estate had settled into a suffocating, deeply humiliating routine. Penelope played her part flawlessly. She managed the massive household, ensured the staff was paid, and presented the image of the dutiful, quiet wife to the outside world. But behind the iron gates, she was completely isolated. Vincent's cruelty had evolved from behind-the-back mockery to blatant open disrespect, and the weapon he used to inflict the most pain was named Serena Croft. Serena was everything Penelope was not. Tall, impossibly slender, with cascading blonde hair and the predatory grace of a starving leopard. Serena was the daughter of a prominent, corrupt politician, making her incredibly valuable to Vincent's racketeering operations. But her relationship with the Mafia Boss was far from purely professional. It started with late nights at the office, then escalated to Serena, accompanying Vincent to business dinners, while Penelope was ordered to stay home. Soon Serena was a fixture at the estate itself. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Penelope was in the grand kitchen, carefully preparing a traditional Italian ragu, a recipe she had spent weeks learning from an elderly neighbor in Little Italy, hoping to surprise Vincent. The scent of garlic tomatoes and slow-roasted beef filled the air. The kitchen doors swung open, and Serena strutted in, wearing one of Vincent's oversized dress shirts and nothing else. Her long, bare legs carried her to the marble island where Penelope was standing. "Oh, sweetie, is that for Vincent?" Serena purred, leaning over to inspect the bubbling pot. She wrinkled her perfect nose. "Heavy carbs and fatty meat. No wonder you look the way you do. Vincent doesn't eat this garbage. He prefers a lighter touch." She dragged a manicured fingernail lightly across her own collarbone, smiling wickedly. Penelope's grip on the wooden spoon tightened until her knuckles turned white. "This is my home, Serena. You will put some clothes on and leave this kitchen." Serena laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that felt like shattered glass. "You're home." "Please. We both know you're just the hired help, holding a legal document. Vincent told me exactly why he married you. You're a bulletproof vest with a heartbeat. Don't flatter yourself, piggy." Before Penelope could respond, Vincent walked into the kitchen, dressed in his tailored trousers, wiping his hands with a towel. He didn't even look at his wife. "Serena, let's go. The car is waiting," Vincent commanded. "Vincent, Penelope said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I made dinner, and I would appreciate it if your associate treated me with basic respect in my own house." Vincent finally turned his cold gaze toward her. His eyes swept over her flour-dusted apron and her full figure, his lip curling in obvious disgust. "If you want respect, earn it. Stop baking and start skipping meals, and throw that slop out. Serena and I are dining at the Continental." He placed a hand on the small of Serena's back and guided her out, leaving Penelope standing alone in the massive kitchen, the sound of the bubbling ragout mocking her efforts. The breaking point arrived a month later at the annual autumn charity gala held at the prestigious Pierre Hotel. This was the one event of the year where the Dons brought their legitimate wives to maintain their public facades. Penelope had spent a small fortune having a beautiful dark emerald gown tailored to her figure, hoping to reclaim just a sliver of her dignity. When they arrived, the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi blinded them. Vincent stood rigidly beside her, his face an emotionless mask. But the moment they stepped inside the grand ballroom, the nightmare began. Serena Croft was already there. She wore a scandalous, backless red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Without a word of apology, Vincent dropped Penelope's arm and walked directly over to his mistress, wrapping his arm around her waist. Penelope was left standing alone in the center of the room. The whispers began immediately. "Did you see that? He didn't even wait 5 minutes. Look at her standing there like a lost cow." Humiliated, Penelope retreated to a quiet corner near the champagne tower, trying to blend into the velvet drapery. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed and the cruelty escalated. A group of mob wives, led by Beatrice Marino, approached her. "Penelope, darling," Beatrice cooed, sipping a martini. "We were just having a debate. Is it true you have to special order your chairs for the dining room so they don't break? Or is that just a vicious rumor?" The women giggled behind their manicured hands. Penelope's face burned hot with shame. "Excuse me," she whispered, pushing past them. As she walked away, someone she didn't know who stepped hard on the trailing hem of her emerald gown. With a sickening rip, the delicate silk tore, exposing the thick fabric of her undergarments and the side of her heavy thigh. Gasps erupted across the room. Several men laughed out loud. Penelope desperately grabbed the torn fabric, trying to cover herself. She looked across the ballroom, her tear-filled eyes locking onto Vincent. He was standing with Uncle Carmine and Serena. Vincent looked at his torn, humiliated wife. He didn't rush over. He didn't take off his jacket to cover her. Instead, he shook his head in absolute disgust, muttered something to Serena that made her laugh, and turned his back on Penelope. In that exact moment, staring at the broad back of the man she had loved so foolishly, the last remaining ember of Penelope's affection was extinguished. The sorrow vanished, replaced by an icy, hardened resolve. She wasn't just going to be a victim anymore. If they wanted her to be a shield, she would show them exactly what heavy armor could do. The humiliation at the gala changed Penelope. She stopped crying. She stopped cooking for Vincent. She stopped trying to shrink herself to avoid taking up space. Instead, she became a ghost in her own home, silent and observant. And in her silence, she began to notice things. Because everyone considered her stupid, deaf, and invisible, they spoke freely around her. The guards, the maids, the underbosses. But the most valuable information came from Uncle Carmine. Carmine Romano had always resented Vincent's rise to power. He believed the empire belonged to the older generation. Late one evening, while Penelope was sitting quietly in the darkened alcove of the estate's sprawling library, hidden by the shadows of the massive oak bookcases, she heard the heavy door click shut. Footsteps echoed, followed by the striking of a match. Carmine's gravelly voice filled the room, speaking into a burner phone. "Yes, Victor." "The plan is set," Carmine murmured. "Vincent is getting arrogant. He's distracted by the Croft girl. He's going to be at the Southside shipping warehouse tomorrow night at midnight, inspecting the new import. He'll only have Leo and 2 guards with him. Send your best men. Once Vincent is out of the picture, I take over the commission, and the Volkov syndicate gets the eastern docks. Just make sure the job is clean." Penelope pressed her hand over her mouth, her blood running cold. Viktor Volkov was the head of the ruthless Russian syndicate, trying to usurp the Romanos' territory. Carmine was selling out his own nephew. Vincent was walking into an absolute slaughter. Despite everything he had done to her, despite the crushing cruelty, Penelope's inherent morality warred with her pain. If Vincent died, the resulting mob war would tear the city apart, and her father, still technically under the Romano umbrella, would be executed in the crossfire. The next evening at 10 o'clock, Penelope stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of Vincent's private study. She knocked twice and pushed the door open without waiting. Vincent was sitting behind his desk, poring over ledgers, a glass of scotch in hand. He looked up, his brow furrowing in instant irritation. "I didn't call for you. Get out!" "Vincent, you can't go to the Southside warehouse tonight," Penelope said, her voice steady, stepping further into the room. "It's a trap." Vincent stopped writing. He slowly put his pen down and stared at her, an incredulous, cruel smile spreading across his lips. "A trap, is that what it is?" "Carmine is working with Viktor Volkov." Penelope pressed on, stepping up to his desk. "I heard him on the phone. He sold you out, Vincent. They are going to ambush you at midnight. You need to send a decoy or call it off." Vincent stood up, leaning over the desk, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and absolute contempt. "Are you out of your mind? You're eavesdropping on my underbosses now. Let me tell you exactly what this is. You are so pathetic, so desperate for my attention, that you're making up childish ghost stories about my own blood relative, just to get me to stay home with you." "I am telling you the truth," Penelope shouted, slamming her hand on the desk. "Carmine wants you dead." "Enough!" Vincent roared, his voice shaking the walls. He walked around the desk, towering over her. "You are a delusional fat cow who has lost touch with reality. My uncle has been loyal to this family for 40 years. You have been here for 6 months, eating my food and embarrassing me in public. If you ever disrespect my blood again, I will have Leo lock you in the basement. Now get out of my sight. I have a business to run." He shoved past her, grabbing his coat and storming out of the study. Penelope stood alone in the quiet room, her heart pounding. He wasn't going to listen. He was going to die. A terrifying, wild plan formed in her mind. If Vincent died, the debt defaulted to her and her father. She had to keep him alive, not out of love, but out of survival. Penelope rushed to her bedroom, stripping off her expensive loungewear and pulling on dark jeans, a thick black sweater, and a dark trench coat. She went to the hidden safe in the floorboards, one she had found, while cleaning, and pulled out a snub-nosed .38 revolver. She had never shot a man, but she knew how to hold a gun. She took the keys to one of the inconspicuous staff cars, a black sedan, and sped into the rainy Chicago night, heading for the Southside docks. By the time she arrived at the sprawling, rusting warehouse complex, the rain was coming down in sheets. She parked 2 blocks away and moved through the shadows. The air smelled of salt and decaying fish. At exactly midnight, Vincent's armored SUV pulled up to loading Dock 4. Vincent stepped out, flanked by Leo Lombardi and 2 armed soldiers. They walked confidently toward the rolling metal doors. Penelope, hidden behind a stack of wooden pallets 50 yards away, saw them first. shadows moving on the rooftops, the glint of sniper scopes in the moonlight. 3 black vans silently pulling up to block the exit of the alleyway. It wasn't just an ambush, it was an execution squad. "Vincent!" Penelope screamed at the top of her lungs, stepping out from behind the pallets. Vincent whipped his head around, his eyes widening in shock as he saw his wife running toward him in the pouring rain. "What the hell are you?" Crack. A sniper bullet sparked against the asphalt right where Vincent had been standing, a second prior missing him, only because he had turned toward Penelope's voice. All hell broke loose. The doors of the black vans slid open, and a dozen Russian cartel members armed with automatic weapons poured out, firing indiscriminately. Leo and the guards returned fire, screaming. "Get down!" Vincent roared, diving behind a concrete pillar. The noise was deafening, the air filling with the smell of cordite and shattered brick. Penelope was caught out in the open. She sprinted toward the pillar where Vincent was pinned down. A Russian soldier flanking the pillar raised his assault rifle, aiming directly at the back of Vincent's head as the Mafia Boss reloaded his weapon. Penelope didn't think. She remembered Vincent's words in the cigar lounge. "She's a bulletproof vest with a heartbeat." With a fierce primal cry, Penelope threw her entire heavy frame forward, tackling the Russian soldier just as he pulled the trigger. The gun went off in a wild burst. Penelope felt a white-hot, agonizing, tearing sensation in her side, followed by another in her shoulder. The impact threw her backward, crashing hard against a stack of metal crates. "Penelope!" Vincent yelled, his voice cracking with a panic he had never felt before. He fired 3 times, dropping the Russian soldier she had tackled. Sirens suddenly wailed in the distance. The police had been tipped off to the gunfire. The surviving Russian operatives, realizing they had lost the element of surprise, scrambled back into their vans and peeled away into the night. The warehouse fell eerily silent, save for the pouring rain and the distant sirens. Vincent scrambled out from behind the pillar, his chest heaving, his expensive suit soaked in rain and grime. "Leo, check the perimeter," he barked before turning toward the metal crates where his wife had fallen. "Penelope," he called out, his voice shaking. He rounded the corner, expecting to find her crying, expecting to find her injured. What he found made his blood freeze in his veins. The ground was slick with a terrifying amount of dark red blood, mixing with the rain and swirling toward the drain. But Penelope was not there. Penelope. Vincent screamed frantically, searching the immediate area. The shadows were empty. The crates were empty. Right in the center of the largest puddle of blood, catching the dim yellow light of the street lamp, was her diamond wedding ring. It had been slipped off and placed deliberately on top of an empty bullet casing. Detective James O'Connor's squad cars skidded into the alleyway moments later, lights flashing, illuminating Vincent Romano on his knees in the mud. The untouchable mafia don was staring at the blood of the woman he had treated worse than a dog, the woman who had just taken 2 bullets meant for him and vanished into the night like a ghost. The flashing red and blue lights of the Chicago Police Department illuminated the pouring rain, casting nightmarish shadows across the South Side loading docks. Detective James O'Connor stood under a black umbrella, watching Vincent Romano with a mixture of grim satisfaction and intense curiosity. Vincent was completely, utterly unresponsive to the chaos around him. He still knelt in the mud, staring at the small, perfect circle of the diamond ring sitting atop the brass casing. His hands, stained with his wife's blood, were trembling. "Don Romano." O'Connor said, his voice cutting through the heavy rain. "We have witnesses reporting a firefight. We have Russian bodies. And we have an ocean of blood right where you're kneeling. Where is your wife, Vincent?" Vincent slowly closed his fist around the diamond ring. The sharp edges of the stone bit into his palm, grounding him in the violent reality of the moment. He stood up, towering over the detective, his eyes utterly dead. "My wife is not here, Detective." Vincent replied, his voice a gravelly, hollow rasp. "She is at home, safe. There was a misunderstanding with some local thieves. My men handled it. Now, if you want to arrest me, do it. Otherwise, get out of my way." Before O'Connor could protest, Leo Lombardi and 4 heavily armed Romano soldiers formed a wall between the police and their boss. Vincent turned and walked away, climbing into the bullet-riddled SUV. The ride back to the Romano estate was suffocatingly silent. Vincent stared at his bloody hands. She had known. Penelope had listened to him call her a fat, delusional cow. She had listened to him mock her, discard her, and degrade her. And in return she had followed him into the dark and taken 2 high-velocity rounds meant for his skull. When the heavy iron gates of the estate swung open, Vincent bypassed the main entrance. "Leo," he commanded, his voice eerily calm. "Take 6 men. Go to my Uncle Carmine's townhouse in Gold Coast. Drag him out of his bed. Bring him to the meat locker in the basement. Do not let him speak to anyone." Leo nodded, his face pale. He had never seen Vincent look like this. It wasn't the fiery rage of a mob boss who had been insulted. It was the cold, terrifying stillness of an executioner who had just realized he was wearing the wrong crown. Vincent walked through the grand foyer, leaving a trail of bloody footprints on the imported Italian marble. Serena Croft was waiting at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. "Vincent, darling, what took you so long?" she purred, trailing down the stairs. "I was getting bored waiting in your bed." Vincent stopped at the base of the stairs. He looked up at his beautiful, flawless mistress. For the first time, he didn't see an asset or a prize. He saw a parasite. "Get out," he whispered. Serena froze, her perfect smile faltering. "What, Vincent, baby, you're covered in mud. Let me draw you a bath." "I said, get out!" Vincent roared, the sheer volume of his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and shattering a crystal vase on a nearby pedestal. "If you are in this house, in 5 minutes, I will have Dominic throw you onto the street, naked. You are nothing to me. Leave." Serena dropped her wine glass, terrified by the demonic look in his eyes, and scrambled up the stairs to pack. An hour later, the air in the estate's soundproof basement was frigid. Carmine Romano hung suspended by his wrists from heavy iron chains, his face bruised and bleeding. Vincent sat in a metal folding chair across from him, rolling Penelope's wedding ring between his bloody fingers. "You set me up, Carmine," Vincent said softly. "You sold your own blood to Victor Volkov. You're crazy, Vincent." Carmine spat blood dribbling down his chin. "I'm your uncle. I built this family with your father. I would never—" Vincent stood up, drawing a silenced 9mm pistol from his shoulder holster in one fluid motion. He didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He shot Carmine in the right kneecap. Carmine's agonizing scream bounced off the concrete walls. "My wife," Vincent said, stepping closer. "The woman you called a blimp. The woman I called a shield. She stood in my study and told me you were planning an ambush. I called her a liar. I broke her heart. And then she came to the docks and took the bullets you paid the Russians to fire at me." Vincent pressed the hot barrel of the gun against Carmine's forehead. "Tell me the truth, uncle, or I will start removing pieces of you until you do." Sobbing, his bravado entirely broken, Carmine confessed. He detailed the alliance with Volkov, the payout, the exact timing of the hit. Vincent listened, the crushing weight of his own arrogance suffocating him. He had been so blind, so obsessed with superficial perfection and ruthless efficiency, that he had alienated the only person in his entire empire who possessed true, unwavering loyalty. "Thank you, Carmine," Vincent whispered. He pulled the trigger. For the next 3 weeks, the Chicago underworld bled. Vincent unleashed a campaign of absolute terror against the Volkov syndicate, wiping out their operations, burning their warehouses and executing their lieutenants in broad daylight. The commission was horrified, but no one dared cross the deranged Don Romano. But behind closed doors, Vincent was unraveling. The hunt for Penelope consumed him. He brought in the most elite underground trackers, hacked hospital databases, and bribed every medical examiner in a 300-mile radius. He was terrified she had crawled off to die in an alleyway, but there was no body. The only clue came from Thomas Sullivan, Penelope's father. When Vincent's men kicked down the door to the bookie's apartment, they found it completely empty, wiped clean. No clothes, no gambling ledgers, no trace of the man. Penelope hadn't vanished by magic. She had a plan, and she had taken her father with her. Vincent sat in his dark study, staring at a portrait of his wife he had dug out of a storage closet. He traced the lines of her soft face. "I will find you Penelope," he vowed to the empty room, "even if I have to burn this country to the ground." 14 months had passed since the shootout at the Southside docks. The Romano family had solidified its iron grip on Chicago, and Vincent was feared more than ever. But he was a hollow man. He rarely slept. He drank too much, and the sprawling Romano estate felt like a mausoleum. He had forbidden the staff from touching Penelope's bedroom. Her clothes still hung in the closet. The scent of her vanilla perfume still faintly lingered in the air. It was a bleak Tuesday morning in late October when Dominic Russo Vincent's newly appointed underboss walked into the study. Dominic was a sharp, pragmatic man who didn't fear Vincent's tempers. He tossed a thick manila folder onto Vincent's desk. "I think we found a ghost, boss." Vincent stopped pouring his morning scotch. He ripped the folder open. Inside were surveillance photographs taken outside a sleek, modern corporate building in Seattle. The first few photos showed a woman in a sharply tailored charcoal grey pantsuit. She was stepping out of a silver Mercedes, flanked by two serious-looking private security contractors. She was undeniably beautiful, projecting an aura of absolute command and untouchable power. Her hair was styled in a sharp, asymmetrical bob, framing a striking face with high cheekbones and piercing eyes. She had lost a significant amount of weight, but it wasn't the frail, starved look of a victim. She looked like a weapon forged in fire. She looked hardened, lethal, and devastatingly gorgeous. Vincent's breath hitched. He dropped his glass, the amber liquid staining the Persian rug. "Is it her?" "Facial recognition says 99% match," Dominic replied, tapping the photo. "She's operating under the name Victoria Sterling. Wait, scratch that, Victoria Hale. She runs a high-end logistics and shipping consultancy on the West Coast. Clean front, legally impeccable. But here is the kicker, Vincent. In the last 3 months, her firm has aggressively outbid us on 4 major shipping contracts out of the port of Los Angeles. She isn't just hiding. She's actively bleeding our legitimate revenue streams." Vincent stared at the photo, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. She was alive. She was thriving. And she was waging a silent corporate war against the man who had broken her. "How did she survive?" Vincent whispered, tracing her image. "She took 2 rifle rounds. We dug deep into the medical underground in the Pacific Northwest," Dominic explained. "We found a disgraced former trauma surgeon, Dr. Nathaniel Brooks. He operates a cash-only clinic for the cartel boys in Seattle. Word on the street is that, a little over a year ago, an older Irish guy matches the description of Thomas Sullivan, brought in a woman, bleeding out in the back of a stolen sedan. Brooks saved her, pulled the lead out, patched the holes, and then she stayed. She used her father's gambling connections to build a network, secured a massive loan from a rival West Coast syndicate under the table, and launched her logistics company." Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, a dark, obsessive smile spreading across his face. She hadn't just survived. She had evolved. The naive, sweet girl who baked ragu and cried in the bathroom was dead. In her place stood a queen who was using his own tactics against him. "Pack a bag, Dominic," Vincent ordered, standing up, his eyes burning with a dangerous fire. "Fuel up the private jet. We're going to Seattle." 2 nights later, the Seattle Art Museum was hosting an exclusive charity gala for ocean conservation. The guest list was a who's who of tech billionaires, old money and corporate titans. Victoria Hale formerly, Penelope Romano stood near a towering glass sculpture, elegantly holding a flute of champagne. She wore a stunning, backless black velvet gown that clung to her new, powerful silhouette. The scars from the bullet wounds were hidden beneath the fabric, but she carried them like medals of honor. She was currently charming a prominent state senator when the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The string quartet's music seemed to falter. The ambient chatter died down to a nervous murmur. Penelope turned her head, her sharp eyes scanning the room. The heavy brass doors of the gallery had been forced open. 6 men in tailored black suits had fanned out, quietly but forcefully, pushing the event security aside, and walking down the center of the room, parting the sea of wealthy elites like a dark storm, was Vincent Romano. He looked older, harder. The silver at his temples had thickened, and there was a haunted, feral intensity in his dark eyes. He didn't look at anyone else. His gaze was locked onto her with the gravitational pull of a dying star. Penelope didn't run. She didn't flinch. Her pulse spiked, a momentary flash of the old terror gripping her chest, but she ruthlessly crushed it down. She handed her champagne glass to a passing waiter, squared her shoulders, and waited. Vincent stopped 3 feet away from her. The silence between them was deafening, electric, and suffocating. He let his eyes roam over her, taking in the sharp lines of her face, the elegant curve of her neck, the absolute absence of the girl he had tortured. "Hello, Penelope," Vincent said, his voice a low, raspy velvet that sent a shiver down her spine. "My name is Victoria," she replied, her voice smooth, icy, and completely detached. "And you are trespassing at a private event, Mr. Romano. I suggest you leave before my security removes you." Vincent let out a short, dark laugh, stepping into her personal space. "Your security? Those rent-a-cops outside Dominic is currently teaching them how to take a nap in the coat room." He leaned in closer, inhaling her scent. "You look magnificent. But a new name and a fancy dress don't change the facts. You are my wife. You belong to me. And it is time to come home." Penelope looked at him, not with fear, but with absolute, crushing pity. "I belong to no one," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "And I don't have a home in Chicago. The woman you married died bleeding out on the asphalt while you stared at a shiny rock. I am not your shield anymore, Vincent." She took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance until their chests were almost touching, forcing him to look down into her eyes. "In fact," she whispered, her lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smile, "if you don't get on a plane and go back to your pathetic, empty mansion tonight, I'm going to become the sword that cuts your empire to pieces. Now get out of my way." Vincent stood frozen, entirely captivated by the lethal predator standing before him. He had come to drag his broken wife back to her cage. Instead, he had just walked into the den of a monster he had created. And God help him, he was more obsessed with her than ever. Vincent Romano didn't get on a plane back to Chicago. The intoxicating mix of fury, bruised ego, and a sick, twisted obsession rooted him in Seattle. He rented out the entire top floor of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel and turned it into a war room. If his wife wanted to play the game of kings, he would show her why he sat on the throne. I want her operations paralyzed." Vincent snarled, pacing the length of the penthouse suite, while Dominic Russo and Leo Lombardi studied the sprawling blueprints of the Port of Seattle. Burn her shipping containers. Bribe the union bosses to strike at her terminals. I want her crawling back to me in 48 hours. Leo, always the blunt instrument, nodded. Consider it done, boss. At 2 a.m. the following morning, Leo led a strike team of 20 heavily armed Romano enforcers to the primary logistics hub owned by Victoria Hale. They brought incendiary charges ready to turn $10 million worth of imported electronics into slag. But when they breached the perimeter fences, the floodlights snapped on, turning the dark docks as bright as midday. Leo squinted, raising his weapon, expecting a firefight with a rival cartel. Instead, he found himself surrounded by 36 heavily armored men wearing the insignias of Aegis Defense Services, a premier, highly legal, private military corporation. Above them, high-definition security cameras pivoted their red recording lights, blinking ominously. A sleek black Audi pulled into the loading bay. The door opened, and Penelope stepped out, wearing a tailored cream wool coat over a dark turtleneck, looking like a corporate monarch. Beside her walked a man in a sharp grey suit, holding a briefcase. Leo. Penelope called out, her voice amplified by the dead silence of the docks. I suggest you tell your men to lower their weapons. Unless you want to explain to the FBI, the ATF, and the Port Authority why you are trespassing on federal maritime property with unregistered automatic firearms. Leo gritted his teeth, his finger hovering over the trigger. You think some rent-a-cops scare us? Penelope Vincent wants this place burned. Vincent is a dinosaur, she replied coldly. This isn't a mob hit, Leo. It's a corporate snare. If a single shot is fired, the footage from those 60 cameras goes directly to the director of the FBI. You'll all be facing domestic terrorism charges before the sun comes up. And the commission will execute Vincent for bringing federal heat onto the families. Drop the guns. Now. Leo looked at the cameras, then at the heavily armed PMC contractors. With a furious curse, he dropped his rifle. His men followed suit. Tell my husband, Penelope said, her eyes glinting like cut diamonds, that my boardroom is open at noon tomorrow. If he wants to talk, he can do it like a civilized man. Or he can go back to Chicago and wait for his empire to starve. The next day, Vincent arrived at the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Bellevue that housed Hale Logistics. He walked into the penthouse boardroom, flanked by Dominic, his face a mask of barely contained violence. Penelope was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. To Vincent's shock, sitting quietly to her right, wearing a bespoke suit and a calm, sober expression, was her father, Thomas Sullivan. The once pathetic, shivering bookie looked like a distinguished executive. Have a seat, Vincent, Penelope said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Vincent slammed his hands on the table, leaning forward. What is this game, Penelope? You think hiding behind private security and legal loopholes makes you untouchable? I am the Don of Chicago. You are a thug with a fancy title, Penelope corrected, not raising her voice. And you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power in the 21st century. You operate in the shadows, Vincent. I operate in the light, and the light is blinding. She opened a leather-bound folder and slid it across the polished wood. Look at it, she commanded. Vincent sneered, opening the file. His eyes scanned the documents, his face draining of color with every line he read. What? What is this? Vincent whispered, his voice trembling. That is the absolute liquidation of the Romano family's legitimate assets, Penelope explained calmly. While you were busy shooting Russians and mourning your bruised pride, my father and I were making friends. We used his old gambling contacts to find the weak points in your money laundering operations. Then I formed a private equity shell company. Over the last 8 months, we systematically bought up the debts of your dummy corporations. We outbid you on the Maersk shipping lines. We acquired the mortgages to the Southside warehouses through a proxy firm. We even bought out the KPMG auditors you bribed to cook your books. She leaned forward, steepling her fingers. I own the ports you use to smuggle your goods. I own the banks that clean your cash. I legally own the paper on your entire life, Vincent. You thought I was a fat, stupid joke. You thought my only value was catching a bullet meant for you. But while you were sleeping with Serena Croft and laughing at my weight, I was watching you. I learned every password, every route, every weakness. You taught me how to run an empire. I just learned how to do it better. Vincent staggered back, collapsing into the leather chair. The documents were flawless. The corporate traps were airtight. If the Commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia, found out that Vincent Romano had been financially castrated by his own estranged wife, they wouldn't just strip him of his title. They would butcher him. You're bluffing. Vincent choked out his arrogance, finally cracking, revealing the desperate man beneath. You would bring down my father's legacy. It's not a bluff. Thomas Sullivan spoke up, his voice steady. You treated my daughter like a piece of meat. You held my life over her head. But she saved us both. You're done, Vincent. The house always wins. And right now, Penelope is the house. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. For the first time in his brutal, bloody life, Vincent Romano had a gun to his head, and it wasn't loaded with bullets. It was loaded with ink paper and irrefutable leverage. He stared across the table at Penelope. The soft, adoring woman who used to bake for him and cry silently in the bathroom was entirely gone. In her place sat a sovereign queen of industry, her posture perfect, her expression an impenetrable fortress of ice. What do you want? Vincent asked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Penelope slid a second, thinner folder across the table. It contained exactly 2 documents. The first document is a petition for an absolute, uncontested divorce. Penelope stated, her voice echoing in the quiet room. You will sign it. You will relinquish any and all claims to me, my business and my father. You will never contact me again. You will never send your men after me, and you will forget my face. Vincent looked at the divorce papers, a sudden sharp pain piercing his chest, a pain far worse than any bullet. He reached out his hand, shaking, hovering over the paper. And the second document? He asked hoarsely. The second document is a transfer of assets, she replied smoothly. I am taking 80% of your legitimate holdings, including the import contracts, the real estate developments in the loop, and the offshore accounts. You keep the street-level rackets, the protection money, and your precious title as Don. 80%. Dominic Rousseau finally spoke, his eyes wide with horror. You're cutting our legs off. We'll be a second-rate crew. The other families will smell blood in the water. That sounds like a management problem for the Don. Penelope said, her eyes never leaving Vincent. If you refuse to sign, I take these files to the Commission tomorrow morning, when the 5 families see that you lost the keys to the kingdom to the bookie's blimp. They will strip you of your rank, and then they will execute you. So choose Vincent. Keep your life and a fraction of your pride, or lose absolutely everything. Vincent felt the walls closing in. He looked at the woman he had married as a joke. In his pursuit of perfection, in his cruel vanity, he had created the instrument of his own destruction. Suddenly Vincent slipped out of his chair. To the absolute shock of Dominic, Thomas, and Penelope, the untouchable Mafia Don dropped to his knees on the thick carpet. Penelope, please! Vincent begged, his voice cracking tears welling in his dark eyes. The monstrous facade had entirely crumbled. I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant, and cruel. I didn't know what I had. When I saw your blood on the asphalt, when I found that ring, it broke me. I swear to you it broke me. I haven't slept. I haven't breathed properly since that night. Come back to Chicago. Take the empire. Run it with me. I will give you anything you want. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I love you. Penelope looked down at the powerful man weeping at her feet. There was a time not so long ago when those words would have been the answer to her deepest prayers. She would have given anything for him to look at her with love, to beg for her affection. But as she looked at him now, she felt nothing. The fire he had put her through had burned away her naivety, leaving only cold, hard steel. She stood up from the table, walked around it, and stood over him. She reached into the collar of her silk blouse and slowly pulled down the fabric, revealing the ugly, jagged, puckered starburst scars on her collarbone and shoulder, the physical memory of the bullets she took for him. Do you know what these scars remind me of? Every morning, Vincent, she whispered, her voice dangerously soft. He looked at the mutilated flesh, a sob catching in his throat. Of my sins. Of how I failed you. No! Penelope corrected her voice, turning to pure ice. They remind me that I am bulletproof, and they remind me that the man I loved died long before I took those bullets. He never existed at all. She picked up a sleek Mont Blanc pen from the table and dropped it onto the floor right in front of his knees. Sign the papers, Vincent, or I burn you to the ground. Vincent stared at the pen. He knew she meant every single word. Slowly, with trembling hands, he picked it up. He signed his name on the divorce decree, severing their bond forever. He signed the asset transfer, signing away the wealth his family had built over generations. When he was finished, he stood up, a broken, hollow shell of a man. "Take your men and leave my city," Penelope commanded, turning her back on him and looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Seattle skyline. Vincent walked out of the boardroom, his footsteps heavy and defeated. He had walked into the cathedral to marry a shield, and he was walking out of a boardroom having been gutted by a sword. Penelope stood at the glass, the sun breaking through the Washington clouds, casting a golden light over her face. She took a deep breath, the air tasting like freedom power and absolute victory. She was no longer a mafia wife. She was the queen of her own empire, and she would never, ever be invisible again. What a twisted, dark, and satisfying journey Penelope's transformation from a discarded, mocked wife into a ruthless corporate queen who brought a mafia don to his knees is the ultimate tale of revenge and empowerment. Vincent learned the hardest way possible that the woman he treated as a shield was actually the sword that would conquer his entire world. If you loved this intense story of betrayal, mafia drama, and ultimate payback, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with fellow story lovers and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling dramatic tales every single week.